A billionaire's tears fell unnoticed in the crowded Manhattan park, until a woman with nothing but kindness to her name offered him the only thing she had, a simple handkerchief. What started as a moment of unexpected compassion would transform two lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain poured relentlessly over Central Park, matching Alexander Blackwood's mood perfectly. Most people had scattered when the storm began, seeking shelter from the downpour. But Alexander remained seated on the bench, his custom Italian suit soaking through, his head bowed low. At 42, he had built an empire worth billions, with offices spanning 5 continents and a portfolio that made Wall Street veterans nervous. Today, none of that mattered. Water streamed down his face, not just rain, but tears he couldn't control anymore. For the first time in decades, Alexander Blackwood was crying in public, and he didn't care who saw. His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket. Probably his assistant, his legal team, or the board members demanding explanations. He ignored them all. "Excuse me, sir, are you all right?" The voice cut through the white noise of rainfall. Alexander looked up, annoyed at the intrusion. A woman stood before him, concern etched across her face. She wasn't remarkable in any conventional way. Average height, brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing a waitress uniform beneath a thin raincoat that did little to keep her dry. "I'm fine," he said curtly, hoping she would leave. "You don't look fine," she persisted, reaching into her pocket. "Here." She held out a simple white handkerchief. It wasn't fancy. No monogram or expensive fabric like the pocket squares he usually carried, just a clean pressed square of cotton. "Keep it," Alexander said, turning away. "Please," she insisted. "My grandmother always said a handkerchief is useless in a pocket when someone needs it." Something in her sincerity broke through his wall. Alexander took the handkerchief, noticing the small embroidered sunflower in one corner. He wiped his eyes, suddenly aware of how he must look, a grown man, sobbing on a park bench in the rain. "Thank you," he managed. "You're welcome." She hesitated. "I'm Elena Reyes." "Alexander," he replied, deliberately omitting his last name. People always reacted to the Blackwood name, and right now, he couldn't bear the recognition. Elena glanced at her watch. "I have to get to work, but—" She pointed to a small cafe across the street. "I work there. If you need a hot cup of coffee or just a dry place to sit, please come by." With a small smile, she turned and hurried away through the rain. Alexander watched her go, clutching the handkerchief. He had built his fortune by reading people, and Elena Reyes didn't seem to want anything from him. In his world, that made her an anomaly. 40 minutes later, Alexander found himself pushing open the door to the cafe Sunrise Corner, according to the worn sign. It was small but clean, with mismatched furniture and local artwork on the walls. Nothing like the Michelin-starred restaurants or exclusive clubs he frequented. Elena was behind the counter, taking an elderly man's order with patient attention. When she spotted Alexander, surprise flickered across her face, but she quickly recovered and offered a warm smile. He chose a corner table and sat down, still clutching her handkerchief. "I didn't think you'd actually come," Elena said when she approached his table. Her dark eyes were kind but direct. "What can I get you?" "Just coffee." "Black." She nodded and returned moments later with a steaming mug. "On the house." "I can pay," Alexander said, reaching for his wallet. "I know you can," she replied simply. "But today, it's on the house." Before he could argue, she was called away to another table. Alexander sipped the coffee. It was surprisingly good, rich and robust, without being bitter. Through the window, he watched the rain begin to let up, patches of blue appearing between gray clouds. On the small television mounted in the corner, a news anchor's voice suddenly caught his attention. Breaking news in the financial world today is tech giant Next-Gen Innovations has pulled out of its merger with Blackwood Industries, citing irreconcilable differences in corporate vision. Blackwood stock has plummeted 30% since the announcement this morning. Sources close to CEO Alexander Blackwood claimed the deal's collapse was unexpected and personally devastating to the billionaire, who had championed the merger as the cornerstone of his legacy. Alexander flinched. There it was, his private pain broadcast for public consumption. The merger he'd worked 18 months to secure, gone in an instant because NextGen's board had gotten cold feet. 30 years building his company, and now the vultures were circling, wondering if the great Alexander Blackwood was finally vulnerable. He glanced around, waiting for the inevitable moment when someone would recognize him. But the cafe's patrons remained absorbed in their own conversations, their own lives. No one cared about a billionaire's failed business deal here. Elena returned to his table. Refill? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Alexander nodded, studying her face for signs of recognition. There were none. "Do you own this place?" he asked as she poured more coffee. "No," she laughed softly. "I just work here. The owner is Mrs. Chen. She's in the back. I'm saving up to go back to school." "What do you want to study?" "Landscape architecture." A hint of embarrassment crossed her face. "I know it sounds impractical, but I've always loved creating gardens. There's something about making beautiful spaces where people can find peace." Alexander thought of his own penthouse, with its professionally designed rooftop garden, that he rarely visited. "It doesn't sound impractical at all." A crash from the kitchen interrupted their conversation. Elena excused herself and disappeared through a swinging door. Alexander sat back, suddenly aware that this was the first normal conversation he'd had in months, maybe years. No agenda, no networking, no subtle power plays. When Elena returned, she was carrying a small plate with a slice of pie. "Apple cinnamon, Mrs. Chen's specialty. I didn't order." "You look like you need it more than coffee," she said, setting it down. "Bad day?" Alexander nearly laughed at the understatement. "You could say that." Elena waited, and to his own surprise, Alexander found himself talking. Not about the specifics of the merger, or the billions at stake, but about the feeling of failure, of public humiliation, of watching something he'd poured his soul into crumble before his eyes. "I've never failed this publicly before," he admitted. "I don't know how to face tomorrow." Elena leaned against the table, considering him. "My father used to say that failure just means you were brave enough to try something difficult." "Your father sounds wise." "He was," she said, a shadow crossing her face. "He died 3 years ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry." Elena straightened up. "Life happens to all of us, regardless of our circumstances. The question is what we do afterward." Before Alexander could respond, the cafe door opened, and a harried-looking man in an expensive suit burst in, scanning the room frantically. Alexander recognized David Chen, his chief financial officer. "Alexander, thank God!" David rushed to the table, oblivious to Elena or the curious glances from other patrons. "We've been looking everywhere for you. Your phone is going straight to voicemail. The board is in emergency session. We need you back at the office now." Reality came crashing back. Alexander felt a heaviness settle over him again. He stood, reaching for his wallet to leave payment for the coffee and pie he hadn't touched. Elena stepped back, clearly sensing the intrusion of his other life. "The coffee's still on the house," she said quietly. Alexander hesitated, then held out her handkerchief. "Thank you. For this?" She shook her head. "Keep it. You might need it again." David was already halfway to the door, phone pressed to his ear. "Car's outside. Martinez is bringing the latest numbers. We can still salvage this." Alexander nodded, then turned back to Elena. "I'd like to come back sometime, when things are calmer." A small smile touched her lips. "We're open every day from 6 to 8. The town car whisked Alexander back to Blackwood Tower, a gleaming testament to his success that now felt like a mausoleum. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of emergency meetings, crisis management, and strategic planning. By midnight, they had stabilized the immediate situation, but the merger was definitively dead, taking with it Alexander's vision for his company's future. "Get some rest," his executive assistant urged as she set down a stack of revised press statements. "Tomorrow's going to be another long day." Alexander nodded. Tree. And Alexander found himself telling Elena about his real identity. Not because he wanted to impress her, but because the anonymity suddenly felt dishonest. "I know who you are," she said when he finished. I recognized you that first day. Alexander blinked in surprise. You did? Elena nodded. My ex-boyfriend worked in finance. Your face was on the cover of Forbes last year. Why didn't you say anything? She shrugged. You seemed like you needed a place where you weren't Alexander Blackwood, Billionaire CEO. Just a person having a bad day. The simplicity of her understanding left him momentarily speechless. Can I ask what happened? Elena ventured. With your company, the real story, not the press version. Alexander took a deep breath. I've spent my entire adult life building Blackwood Industries. Started with nothing but student loan debt and an idea. Built it into a global corporation. He paused. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of why I started. The merger with NextGen was supposed to be my crowning achievement, revolutionizing how technology and infrastructure interact. What went wrong? Their CEO got cold feet, said our cultures weren't compatible. Alexander's jaw tightened. The truth is, he wanted more control than I was willing to give. It became about ego rather than vision. Elena considered this. And that's why you were crying in the park? Because a deal fell through? Put that way, it sounded trivial. Alexander shook his head. I was crying because I realized I'd put everything into this merger. My time, my energy, my future plans. I neglected relationships, missed my sister's wedding, canceled vacations. All for a deal that collapsed in a single board meeting. And now? Now the vultures are circling. Competitors looking to poach our talent. Venture capitalists eyeing our vulnerable subsidiaries. He ran a hand through his hair. 30 years of work at risk because I put all my eggs in one basket. Elena was quiet for a moment, running her fingers over a lavender stem. You know, in landscape design, we have this concept called resilient planting. The idea is to create gardens that can withstand unexpected conditions, drought, frost, pests. The key is diversity. If you plant only one type of flower and disease strikes, you lose everything. But a diverse garden can weather almost any storm. Alexander looked at her, understanding dawning. You think my business lacks diversity. I think, Elena said carefully, that when you build anything, a garden, a business, a life, with only one measure of success, you're vulnerable. Her words struck deeper than any board meeting analysis. Alexander stared at the thriving garden around them, built by volunteers working a few hours at a time, creating something beautiful without corporate budgets or strategic plans. I should get going, Elena said, glancing at her watch. I'm meeting my sister for dinner. As they walked back toward the street, Alexander found himself reluctant to end their conversation. May I see you again? Perhaps dinner this weekend? Elena stopped, studying his face. Alexander, I'm flattered, but… Just dinner? He clarified quickly. As friends, I'd like to hear more about your garden designs. She seemed to be weighing something in her mind. Sunday evening works for me. I volunteer here until 5. I'll pick you up at the garden at 5:30. Elena nodded, then hesitated. Alexander? Whatever happens with your company, remember there's more to life than business deals. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Alexander standing on the sidewalk, the weight on his shoulders somehow lighter than it had been in years. When he returned to Blackwood Tower, chaos awaited. His phone had 78 missed calls, and his assistant looked ready to collapse from stress. Where have you been? She demanded, forgetting professional decorum. The Asian markets opened, and we're in free fall. The board wants an emergency session tonight. Alexander took a deep breath. For the first time in days, his mind was clear. Call everyone into the main conference room. In 30 minutes. Everyone? But… Everyone, he repeated firmly. From department heads to interns, I have something to say. Exactly 30 minutes later, Alexander stood before a packed conference room. Hundreds more employees watched via video link from offices around the world. The tension was palpable. Rumors of layoffs and restructuring had been circulating for days. For 30 years, Alexander began, Blackwood Industries has defined itself by constant growth and expansion. We've measured success in stock prices and market capitalization. He paused, looking at the worried faces before him. Today, that approach failed us. A murmur ran through the crowd. The NextGen merger is dead. Alexander continued. And while that's a setback, it's also an opportunity. An opportunity to redefine what this company stands for. He moved away from the podium, speaking directly to his team. We built this company to solve problems. Real problems that affect how people live and work. Somewhere along the way, we started chasing deals for the sake of deals. Growth for the sake of growth. Alexander reached into his pocket and touched Elena's handkerchief. Starting today, we're returning to our roots. Instead of one massive merger, we'll pursue strategic partnerships with smaller, innovative companies that share our original mission. We'll diversify our approach to create a more resilient organization. The tension in the room began to shift to something else, curiosity, perhaps even hope. I've made mistakes, Alexander admitted. I've been too focused on a single vision of success. That changes now. He straightened his shoulders. I'm establishing a new division focused on sustainable infrastructure projects. We'll start with 3 pilot programs in underserved communities. By the time the meeting ended, the atmosphere had transformed. People left talking animatedly, energized by the new direction. Alexander's executive team remained behind, looking both stunned and cautiously optimistic. It's risky, his CFO said bluntly. The market expects aggressive action after the next-gen fallout. The market will adjust, Alexander replied. We're still Blackwood Industries. We're just becoming a better version of ourselves. Later that night, alone in his penthouse, Alexander stood on his neglected rooftop garden. He'd barely set foot there in months, too busy with the merger to appreciate the carefully curated space. Now, he saw it with fresh eyes, beautiful but sterile, designed for appearance rather than joy. He pulled out his phone and composed a text to Elena. Thank you for the perspective today. You've helped more than you know. Her reply came a few minutes later, just returning the favor. A handkerchief for a listening ear seems fair. Alexander smiled, looking out at the city lights. For the first time since the merger collapsed, he felt something unexpected taking root inside him. Not resignation or determination, but genuine hope. Sunday arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp air, golden sunlight, and trees beginning to show their fall colors. Alexander spent the morning reviewing proposals for the new sustainability division, energized by the creative ideas his team had generated in just a few days. The company's stock had stabilized after his announcement, and while some analysts remained skeptical, others praised the bold pivot. At 4:30, Alexander dismissed his driver and took a taxi to within a block of the community garden. He wore casual clothes, jeans and a simple button-down shirt, rather than his usual tailored suit. Walking the final distance, he felt a strange nervousness he hadn't experienced in years. The garden was alive with weekend activity. Families harvesting vegetables, elderly couples tending flowers, children running along the paths. Alexander spotted Elena kneeling beside her plot, carefully pruning a shrub. She wore faded jeans with dirt stains at the knees and a floppy sun hat that hid her face. "Is this a bad time?" he asked, approaching slowly. Elena looked up, pushing the hat back. Her cheeks were flushed from exertion, a smudge of soil on one cheekbone. "Alexander! You're early." "I can wait," he offered, gesturing to a bench. "No need. I'm just finishing up." She stripped off her gardening gloves and stood, brushing soil from her knees. "Let me wash up and we can go." While Elena disappeared into the garden's small shed, an elderly man approached Alexander, eyeing him curiously. "You must be Elena's friend," he said, his accent hinting at Eastern European origins. "I am Dmitri. I run this garden." "Alexander," he replied, shaking the man's weathered hand. "It's a beautiful space you've created here." Dmitri nodded, pride evident in his posture. 20 years ago, this was just an empty lot full of trash. Now look. He gestured expansively. Food grows here. Beauty grows here. Community grows here. How did you start it? One raised bed at a time, Dmitri said simply. That is the only way to build something that lasts, with patience and love. His shrewd eyes studied Alexander. Elena says you run a big company. I do, Alexander acknowledged. And does it feed people? Create beauty? Bring them together? Before Alexander could answer, Elena returned, her face freshly washed, a small backpack slung over one shoulder. She'd exchanged her gardening hat for a knitted beanie that somehow made her look both younger and more sophisticated. "I see you've met Dmitri," she said, smiling warmly at the old man. "He's the heart and soul of this place." "Just an old man playing in the dirt," Dmitri demurred, though his eyes twinkled with pleasure at her praise. "Enjoy your dinner, Elena. Remember, Tuesday we plant the fall bulbs." As they walked away, Alexander found himself uncharacteristically uncertain. "I made reservations at Luca's," he said, naming an upscale Italian restaurant nearby. "But we can go somewhere else if you prefer." Elena hesitated. "Luca's is a bit formal for how I'm dressed." "You look perfect," Alexander said automatically, then caught himself. "But I'm happy to go wherever you're comfortable." Elena considered him for a moment, then smiled. "I know a place, if you don't mind a bit of a walk." 20 minutes later, they arrived at a small Argentinian restaurant tucked between a laundromat and a vintage clothing store. The space was narrow but warm, with family photos covering the walls and mismatched chairs around wooden tables. A woman in her 60s greeted Elena with a hug and rapid Spanish. "Maria, this is my friend Alexander," Elena said when they separated. "Alexander, Maria and her husband Carlos own this place." "Any friend of Elena is welcome here," Maria declared, leading them to a corner table. "The usual Querida?" Elena nodded, and Maria disappeared into the kitchen without taking Alexander's order. "Hope you like empanadas and chimichurri steak," Elena said, noticing his confusion. "Maria doesn't believe in menus. She just feeds you what's good that day." Alexander relaxed into his chair. "Sounds perfect." The meal that followed was unlike any dining experience in Alexander's recent memory. Plates arrived in a steady stream: handmade empanadas with flaky pastry, grilled vegetables with just the right char, tender steak with bright chimichurri sauce. Carlos emerged from the kitchen to pour them glasses of Malbec, refusing payment with a wave of his hand. "Elena helped our grandson get a scholarship to design school," he explained to Alexander. "Wine is the least we can offer." Between bites of the delicious food, Alexander and Elena talked, really talked, about their lives. He told her about growing up in a middle-class suburb, his father's hardware store that went bankrupt, and how that experience shaped his drive to build something lasting. She shared stories of her childhood in Queens, her immigrant parents, sacrifices, and her dream to create green spaces in urban neighborhoods. "My father was a janitor at the Botanical Garden," Elena explained. "He couldn't afford to take us on vacations, but every Sunday he'd bring us to the garden. He'd point out every plant by its scientific name. He learned them all just by listening to the botanists talk while he cleaned." "That's where your love of plants comes from," Alexander observed. Elena nodded, a wistful smile playing on her lips. "He used to say that gardens are the great equalizer. Rich or poor, everyone can appreciate the miracle of a seed becoming a flower." As they shared dessert, a luscious flan with caramel sauce, Alexander found himself telling Elena things he rarely discussed with anyone. When the merger fell apart, it wasn't just about business, he admitted. It was about legacy. "I'm 42 with no children, no spouse. Blackwood Industries is my life's work. If it fails, then you'll build something else," Elena said simply. "You didn't stop being you when your company hit a rough patch." Her words resonated with something deep inside him. "What about you? Why landscape architecture? Why not just keep working at the cafe and volunteering at the garden?" Elena's eyes lit up with passion. "Because I want to create spaces that heal. Urban areas have so little green space, especially in poor neighborhoods. Studies show that access to nature reduces stress, improves mental health, even lowers crime rates." She leaned forward. "Imagine transforming vacant lots into pocket parks, building rooftop gardens on schools, creating green corridors through concrete jungles. That's what I want to do." "You've thought a lot about this." "For years," she admitted. But school is expensive, and life kept getting in the way. My father's illness, then helping my sister with her kids after her divorce. But you're still pursuing it. One class at a time, Elena said with determination. I'll get there eventually. By the time they finished their coffee, the restaurant had emptied except for Carlos and Maria, who sat at a table near the kitchen counting the day's receipts. Thank you for bringing me here, Alexander said as they stepped outside into the cool evening air. Best meal I've had in months. Better than Michelin stars sometimes, Elena agreed. Real food, made with love. Alexander offered to call a car to take Elena home, but she shook her head. It's a beautiful night. I'd rather walk. My apartment isn't far. They strolled through the neighborhood, their conversation flowing easily from books they'd read to places they hoped to visit someday. When they reached a small apartment building with a fire escape zigzagging up its brick facade, Elena stopped. This is me, she said. Thank you for dinner. I had a nice time. Thank you for your company, Alexander replied. And for showing me a restaurant I never would have found on my own. Elena studied his face in the streetlight glow. You seem different from the man I met in the park last week. I feel different, Alexander admitted. Talking with you, it's given me perspective. Glad I could help, she said with a small smile. Good night, Alexander. Elena, he called as she turned toward the building entrance. I'd like to see you again. She hesitated, uncertainty crossing her features. Alexander, I enjoyed tonight, but I'm not sure this is a good idea. Our worlds are very different. They don't have to be. Elena shook her head gently. I've dated men from your world before. It never ends well. They see me as a novelty, a temporary escape from their reality. Eventually, they return to their real lives, and I'm left behind. The honesty of her assessment stung, but Alexander couldn't deny its potential truth. How many of his wealthy friends had slummed it with someone from a different social circle, only to eventually marry someone from their own milieu? I understand your caution, he said carefully, but I'd still like us to be friends, if nothing else. Your perspective has been valuable to me. Elena considered this, then nodded. Friends, I can do, but let's be clear about expectations. Crystal clear, Alexander agreed, though he felt an unexpected disappointment at her boundaries. May I call you later this week? You may, she said with a small smile. Good night, Alexander. He waited until she was safely inside the building before walking to the main avenue to hail a taxi. On the ride back to his penthouse, Alexander replayed their evening in his mind. Elena was unlike anyone in his social circle, straightforward, unpretentious, passionate about her work without any of the status-seeking he was accustomed to, and she had just friend-zoned him completely. Alexander laughed quietly to himself. When was the last time anyone had turned him down? Probably not since before he made his first million. The experience was oddly refreshing. Monday morning brought a flurry of activity at Blackwood Tower. Alexander arrived early, energized and focused in a way his executive team hadn't seen since before the next-gen debacle. By lunchtime, he had approved the first 3 pilot projects for the new sustainability division and scheduled a town hall to introduce the initiative to the entire company. You seem rejuvenated, his CFO commented as they reviewed the quarterly projections. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. Alexander thought of Elena's perspective on resilient systems and diverse approaches. I'm trying something new, he said simply, broadening my horizons. That evening, as Alexander was preparing to leave the office, his assistant informed him that a Ms. Victoria Winters was waiting in reception. Victoria? Alexander frowned. His former fiancée was the last person he expected to see. Their relationship had ended 2 years ago when she left him for a French hotel magnate. Send her in. Victoria swept into his office looking exactly as he remembered, impeccably dressed in designer clothing, not a platinum blonde hair out of place, perfect makeup highlighting her aristocratic features. She air-kissed both his cheeks in European fashion. Alexander, darling, you look well. Victoria, this is unexpected. She settled gracefully into a visitor's chair, crossing her long legs. I heard about the next-gen situation. I was concerned. Alexander leaned against his desk, arms crossed. Were you now? How thoughtful. Victoria had the grace to look slightly abashed at his skepticism. "I know we didn't end on the best terms. You left me for Henri Dumont with barely a goodbye," Alexander said flatly. "Not exactly terms to end on. Ancient history." Victoria waved dismissively. "And Henri is ancient history too, as it happens." "I'm sorry to hear that," Alexander said, not entirely sincerely. "What brings you here, Victoria?" "I doubt it's just concern for my welfare." She studied him with calculating eyes. "You've changed. There's something different about you." "People do change. What do you want?" "Victoria." They stepped outside into the cool evening air. "Best meal I've had in months." "Better than Michelin stars sometimes," Elena agreed. "Real food, made with love." Alexander offered to call a car to take Elena home, but she shook her head. "It's a beautiful night. I'd rather walk. My apartment isn't far." They strolled through the neighborhood, their conversation flowing easily from books they'd read to places they hoped to visit someday. When they reached a small apartment building with a fire escape zigzagging up its brick facade, Elena stopped. "This is me," she said. "Thank you for dinner. I had a nice time." "Thank you for your company," Alexander replied. "And for showing me a restaurant I never would have found on my own." Elena studied his face in the streetlight glow. "You seem different from the man I met in the park last week." "I feel different," Alexander admitted. "Talking with you, it's given me perspective." "Glad I could help," she said with a small smile. "Good night, Alexander." "Elena," he called as she turned toward the building entrance. "I'd like to see you again." She hesitated, uncertainty crossing her features. "Alexander, I enjoyed tonight, but I'm not sure this is a good idea. Our worlds are very different." "They don't have to be." Elena shook her head gently. "I've dated men from your world before. It never ends well. They see me as a novelty, a temporary escape from their reality. Eventually, they return to their real lives, and I'm left behind." The honesty of her assessment stung, but Alexander couldn't deny its potential truth. How many of his wealthy friends had slummed it with someone from a different social circle, only to eventually marry someone from their own milieu? "I understand your caution," he said carefully, "but I'd still like us to be friends, if nothing else. Your perspective has been valuable to me." Elena considered this, then nodded. "Friends, I can do, but let's be clear about expectations." "Crystal clear," Alexander agreed, though he felt an unexpected disappointment at her boundaries. "May I call you later this week?" "You may," she said with a small smile. "Good night, Alexander." He waited until she was safely inside the building before walking to the main avenue to hail a taxi. On the ride back to his penthouse, Alexander replayed their evening in his mind. Elena was unlike anyone in his social circle, straightforward, unpretentious, passionate about her work without any of the status-seeking he was accustomed to, and she had just friend-zoned him completely. Alexander laughed quietly to himself. When was the last time anyone had turned him down? Probably not since before he made his first million. The experience was oddly refreshing. Monday morning brought a flurry of activity at Blackwood Tower. Alexander arrived early, energized and focused in a way his executive team hadn't seen since before the next-gen debacle. By lunchtime, he had approved the first 3 pilot projects for the new sustainability division and scheduled a town hall to introduce the initiative to the entire company. "You seem rejuvenated," his CFO commented as they reviewed the quarterly projections. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." Alexander thought of Elena's perspective on resilient systems and diverse approaches. "I'm trying something new," he said simply, "broadening my horizons." That evening, as Alexander was preparing to leave the office, his assistant informed him that a Ms. Victoria Winters was waiting in reception. "Victoria?" Alexander frowned. His former fiancée was the last person he expected to see. Their relationship had ended 2 years ago when she left him for a French hotel magnate. "Send her in." Victoria swept into his office looking exactly as he remembered, impeccably dressed in designer clothing, not a platinum blonde hair out of place, perfect makeup highlighting her aristocratic features. She air-kissed both his cheeks in European fashion. "Alexander, darling, you look well." "Victoria, this is unexpected." She settled gracefully into a visitor's chair, crossing her long legs. I heard about the next-gen situation. I was concerned. Alexander leaned against his desk, arms crossed. Were you now? How thoughtful. Victoria had the grace to look slightly abashed at his skepticism. I know we didn't end on the best terms. You left me for Henri Dumont with barely a goodbye, Alexander said flatly. Not exactly terms to end on. Ancient history. Victoria waved dismissively. And Henri is ancient history too, as it happens. I'm sorry to hear that, Alexander said, not entirely sincerely. What brings you here, Victoria? I doubt it's just concern for my welfare. She studied him with calculating eyes. You've changed. There's something different about you. People do change. What do you want? Victoria stood, moving closer to him. Perhaps I've realized I made a mistake. We were good together, Alexander. We understood each other's worlds. With the right partner by your side, you could weather this storm and emerge stronger than ever. 2 weeks ago, Alexander might have been tempted. Victoria was beautiful, socially connected and familiar. They had shared history and moved in the same circles. On paper, they made sense. But as he looked at her now, all he could think about was Elena's dirt-smudged cheek as she tended her garden plot, her genuine passion when talking about creating green spaces in urban neighborhoods, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed. Thank you for your concern, Victoria, he said firmly, stepping away from her approach. But I'm doing fine on my own, and I'm afraid I have another appointment this evening. Surprise, then annoyance, flashed across Victoria's perfect features. You're dismissing me? For an appointment? I am, Alexander confirmed, reaching for his jacket. It was interesting seeing you again. After Victoria left, clearly displeased, Alexander checked his phone and found a text from Elena. How did your sustainability meeting go? He smiled and texted back. Better than expected. Progress being made. How was your day? Over the next 2 weeks, Alexander and Elena settled into a pattern of regular texts and occasional meetups. True to her word, Elena maintained friendly boundaries, but she became a sounding board for his ideas about redirecting Blackwood Industries. In turn, he provided feedback on her landscape design portfolio as she prepared her application for the fall semester. One rainy Tuesday, Alexander was leaving a business lunch when he spotted a familiar figure hurrying along the sidewalk, newspaper held over her head as a makeshift umbrella. Without thinking, he directed his driver to pull alongside her. Elena, he called, lowering the window. Need a ride? She peered through the rain, recognition dawning. Alexander, what are you doing in this neighborhood? Meeting with a potential partner for our green infrastructure project. Get in before you're soaked. Elena hesitated only briefly before sliding into the car, bringing the scent of rain and wet newspaper with her. Thank you. I was running late for class and didn't check the forecast. Where to? Alexander asked. City College, if it's not too far out of your way. Not at all. He instructed his driver, then turned back to Elena. You didn't mention you had class today. Just an information session about the fall program, she explained, attempting to smooth her damp hair. I'm hoping to get more details about scholarship opportunities. I thought you were taking one class at a time? That was the plan, Elena sighed. But at that rate, I'd be 50 before I finished. The program director suggested I apply for full-time study with financial aid. It would mean quitting one of my jobs, but I might actually graduate while I'm still young enough to work. Alexander wanted to offer help immediately. He could easily fund her entire education without noticing the expense, but he sensed that would cross the boundaries she'd established. Instead, he asked, which job would you keep, the cafe or something else? I'd keep the cafe for weekends, Elena said. It's flexible, and Mrs. Chen understands about school. I'd probably give up the cleaning service jobs. They pay better, but the hours are more rigid. The car pulled up outside City College's main building. Elena gathered her damp newspaper and reached for the door handle. Thank you for the rescue, she said with a warm smile. I owe you one. Just returning the favor, Alexander replied, remembering their first meeting in the park. Good luck with your session. As the car pulled away, an idea began to form in Alexander's mind. He spent the ride back to Blackwood Tower making calls and sending emails, setting something in motion that excited him more than any business deal had in years. The following Saturday, Alexander arrived at Sunrise Corner Cafe just as Elena's shift was ending. She looked surprised to see him. They hadn't planned to meet. "Alexander? Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," he assured her. "But I need to show you something. Do you have time?" Elena checked her watch. "I suppose. What is it?" "It's easier if I show you," he said mysteriously. "Trust me." Elena's curiosity won out over her caution. "Let me grab my bag." Outside, Alexander's driver waited with the town car. Elena raised an eyebrow but got in without comment. As they drove, Alexander felt an unfamiliar nervousness. "Are you going to tell me where we're going?" Elena asked after they'd been driving for 15 minutes. "We're almost there," Alexander promised. The car turned onto a street in the Bronx that Elena clearly recognized. "This is my neighborhood," she said, confusion evident in her voice. "Why are we here?" Alexander didn't answer as the car pulled up beside a vacant lot, except it was no longer entirely vacant. Construction equipment sat at one end, and what appeared to be the beginnings of raised garden beds occupied the center of the space. "What is this?" Elena asked as they got out of the car. "The first project of Blackwood Industries' new Urban Green Space Initiative," Alexander explained, leading her through a temporary gate. "We're converting vacant lots into community gardens and pocket parks in neighborhoods with limited green space." Elena walked slowly into the lot, taking in the preliminary work. "You're building a community garden here? In my neighborhood?" "We are," Alexander confirmed, "and I was hoping you might help design it." Elena turned to him, her expression a mix of emotions he couldn't quite read. "Is this because of me? Because of what I said about wanting to create green spaces?" Alexander stepped closer. "Your passion inspired me, yes. But this makes business sense too. Blackwood has always been involved in urban development. This is just a different approach. Instead of only building high-rises, we're creating spaces that improve community well-being." "And you want me to design it?" Elena still sounded skeptical. "As a paid consultant," Alexander clarified. "Your experience with the community garden makes you qualified. This would be a professional opportunity, not a favor." Elena walked the perimeter of the lot, her professional eye clearly assessing the space, the light patterns, the possibilities. "It has potential," she admitted. "Good southern exposure, enough space for multiple functions. The community here really needs something like this." "So you'll do it?" Alexander asked, trying not to sound too eager. Elena faced him directly. "Why are you really doing this, Alexander? Is it about the garden, or is it about me?" Her directness caught him off guard. "Both," he admitted after a moment. "Your perspective helped me see opportunities I was missing. This project is genuine, the first of many we hope to develop. But yes, I specifically chose this neighborhood because I wanted to offer you an opportunity that aligns with your goals." Elena considered his words carefully. "If I accept, it needs to be completely professional. No special treatment, no strings attached. I would report to whoever runs this initiative, not to you directly." "Absolutely," Alexander agreed. "The project is being overseen by our new sustainability director, Dr. Maya Johnson. You'd work with her team." He paused. "This could also be a portfolio piece for your school applications." That practical point seemed to resonate with Elena. She took one more walk around the lot, then turned to him with a decisive nod. "I'll do it," she said. "But I mean it about keeping things professional." "Of course," Alexander promised, even as he felt a surge of pleasure at her acceptance. "Dr. Johnson will contact you next week to discuss details." As they drove back to Elena's apartment, she was quieter than usual, seemingly lost in thought. When they arrived, Alexander walked her to the building entrance. "Thank you for the opportunity," Elena said formally. "It means a lot to me." "You earned it," Alexander replied. "Your designs at the community garden are impressive. This is a business decision, not charity." Elena studied his face. Then her professional facade softened slightly. Still, thank you for seeing potential in me. That's easy to do, Alexander said quietly. For a moment, they stood in silence, something unspoken hovering between them. Then Elena cleared her throat and stepped back. I should go in. My sister is bringing the kids over for dinner. Of course. Enjoy your evening. As Alexander walked back to the car, he felt lighter than he had in months. The new initiative excited him professionally, but more importantly, the look on Elena's face when she realized she would be designing an actual community space had been worth every effort to make it happen. Over the next 3 weeks, Elena threw herself into the garden project with characteristic dedication. Alexander kept his promise about maintaining professional boundaries, receiving updates on her work through Dr. Johnson rather than contacting Elena directly about the project. Their personal friendship continued through occasional texts and coffee equals meetings, during which Elena would enthusiastically share her progress on the garden design while carefully avoiding any acknowledgement of the growing connection between them. One evening, Alexander was working late at his office when his assistant buzzed him. "Sir, there's an Elena Reyes here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite insistent." Alexander was immediately concerned. Elena had never come to his office before. "Send her in." When Elena entered, her face was flushed with excitement, her eyes bright. She carried a large portfolio case. "I'm sorry to barge in like this," she said in a rush, "but I couldn't wait to show you. I just got out of the presentation with Dr. Johnson's team, and they approved my design, the full design, with all the elements I hoped for." Her enthusiasm was contagious. Alexander came around his desk, genuinely pleased for her. "That's wonderful news. I knew they would love your work." Elena unzipped her portfolio and spread out detailed renderings across his desk. "Look, we're including a teaching garden for the elementary school, a community vegetable plot, a butterfly habitat, and a small performance space with natural seating." As she walked him through each element of the design, Alexander found himself captivated not just by the plans but by Elena herself, her passion, her intelligence, her vision for transforming an empty lot into a vibrant community space. "It's beautiful," he said when she finished. "Truly remarkable work." Elena beamed, then seemed to suddenly remember where she was. She glanced around his expansive office with its floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive furnishings. "I should have called first," she said, gathering her drawings. "I was just so excited, and I wanted you to be the first to know since you made it all possible." "I'm glad you came," Alexander said sincerely. "Would you like to celebrate? We could grab dinner." Elena hesitated, then shook her head. "I can't tonight. I promised Dmitri I'd help prepare the garden for an event tomorrow." She carefully returned her drawings to the portfolio. "But thank you for seeing me without an appointment." "You're welcome in my office anytime," Alexander assured her. "No appointment necessary." Elena zipped up her portfolio and headed for the door, then paused. "The construction team says we'll break ground next week. Will you come to the community introduction meeting on Saturday? The neighborhood should meet the man behind the project." "I'll be there," Alexander promised. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for the community meeting. Alexander arrived at the vacant lot 30 minutes early, dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt rather than his usual business attire. Construction barriers had been decorated with colorful renderings of Elena's design, and folding chairs were arranged in a semicircle facing a small temporary platform. Dr. Johnson greeted him with a firm handshake. "Good morning, Alexander. We're expecting about 50 community members, plus representatives from the borough president's office and the parks department." "Excellent. Where's Elena?" Setting up the refreshment table with some local volunteers, Dr. Johnson replied, gesturing toward the far end of the lot where Elena was arranging cookies and lemonade on a folding table. She wore a simple sundress with a light cardigan, her hair pulled back at a neat ponytail. Even from a distance, Alexander could see her nervous energy as she rearranged the cups for the third time. "I'll go see if she needs help," he said, making his way through the growing crowd. Elena looked up as he approached, relief washing over her face. "You came." "I promised I would," Alexander replied. "Nervous about your presentation?" "Terrified," she admitted, lowering her voice. "It's one thing to present to Dr. Johnson's team, but these are my neighbors. If they hate it—" "They won't," Alexander assured her. "Your design speaks directly to community needs. You've thought of everything." Elena took a deep breath. "Thank you for believing in me. Always," he said simply. People began filling the chairs. Families with children, elderly residents, young couples, a true cross-section of the neighborhood. Elena excused herself to review her notes one last time while Alexander mingled with the crowd, introducing himself not as the CEO of Blackwood Industries, but simply as a project partner. "Are you really Alexander Blackwood?" asked a teenage boy who had been eyeing him suspiciously. "The billionaire guy." "I am," Alexander acknowledged. "Why do you care about our neighborhood?" the boy challenged. "We don't have anything you want." The direct question caught Alexander off guard, but he appreciated the honesty. "That's a fair question. The truth is, I'm learning that success isn't just about building skyscrapers or making money. It's about creating spaces that matter, that improve lives. This garden is the beginning of that new vision." The boy seemed surprised by his candor. "My grandma says we need a garden more than another liquor store or check-cashing place." "Your grandma is very wise," Alexander said with a smile. Dr. Johnson stepped up to the microphone, calling the meeting to order. She introduced herself and gave a brief overview of the Urban Green Space Initiative, then invited Elena to present the design. Alexander watched with quiet pride as Elena took the microphone. Her initial nervousness melted away as she began explaining her vision for the space, her voice growing stronger and more confident with each element she described. "This won't just be a garden," Elena told her neighbors. "It will be a classroom where children learn how plants grow, a market where families can access fresh vegetables, a performance space for community events, and a peaceful retreat from city noise." She walked the audience through each section of the design, explaining how she had incorporated feedback from community surveys and addressing potential concerns before they could be raised. When she finished, the questions from the audience were enthusiastic rather than critical. How could they volunteer? When would construction finish? Could school groups get involved? Alexander remained in the background, content to let Elena and Dr. Johnson handle the presentation. This was their moment, not his. But as the formal meeting concluded and people mingled around the refreshment table, a small elderly woman approached him directly. "You must be the money man," she said without preamble, her accent hinting at Caribbean origins. "I'm Ms. Josephine. I've lived on this block for 52 years. "It's a pleasure to meet you," Alexander said, extending his hand. "I hope you like what we're planning for this space." Ms. Josephine shook his hand firmly, her grip surprisingly strong for her age. "I've seen men like you come through this neighborhood before. They make promises, take photos for their fancy brochures, then disappear when the cameras leave." "That's not," Alexander began, but she cut him off. "I'm not finished," she said sharply. "That Elena girl, she's one of us, grew up 6 blocks from here. Helped my grandson with his college applications. If she trusts you, I'm willing to give you a chance." Her eyes narrowed. "But if this is just some tax write-off or publicity stunt, you'll answer to me." The fierce protectiveness in her voice reminded Alexander of how communities like this had been exploited by developers in the past, including, he had to admit, by Blackwood Industries in its earlier days. "This isn't a stunt," he said solemnly. "You have my word that we'll see this through. The garden will be built exactly as Elena designed it, and we're establishing a maintenance fund to keep it operating for years to come." Ms. Josephine studied his face, searching for insincerity. "We'll see," she finally said. "Actions speak louder than words, money man." As she walked away, Alexander felt a presence at his elbow. Elena had witnessed the exchange. "Don't mind Ms. Josephine," she said quietly. "She's the neighborhood watchdog. Nothing happens on this block without her approval." "She cares deeply about this community," Alexander observed. "That's something I'm only beginning to understand. How places shape us, how we shape them in return." Elena looked at him curiously. "That's very philosophical for a Saturday morning," Alexander laughed. "Maybe I'm evolving." "Speaking of evolving," Elena said, glancing at her watch, "I have news. I was going to tell you later, but I got accepted into the landscape architecture program. Full scholarship." "Elena, that's wonderful," Alexander exclaimed, resisting the urge to hug her. "When did you find out?" "Yesterday. The letter came in the afternoon mail." Her face glowed with quiet pride. "Classes start next month." "We need to celebrate," Alexander insisted. "Dinner tonight? Your choice of restaurant." Elena hesitated only briefly. "Actually, there's a place I've been wanting to try. Nothing fancy, but the reviews are excellent. Text me the address, Alexander said. I'll pick you up at 7. The rest of the community meeting went smoothly. By noon, most attendees had departed with renewed hope for their neighborhood's future. As the cleanup crew began dismantling the chairs, Elena approached Alexander one last time. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It meant a lot to have you here." "I wouldn't have missed it," he replied. "Your presentation was perfect." Elena blushed slightly at the praise. "See you tonight," she said, before turning to help with the cleanup. Alexander walked back to where his driver waited, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. This project, and the others like it already in development, represented a genuine shift in his company's focus. Profits still mattered, of course, but so did the impact on communities and lives. The restaurant Elena chose for dinner was a small Ethiopian place in a neighborhood Alexander had rarely visited. The warm, intimate space was filled with delicious aromas and the soft sounds of traditional music. They sat at a small table covered with a colorful woven cloth, eating with their hands from a shared platter, laughing as Alexander attempted to master the technique of scooping stew with injera bread. "I can navigate billion-dollar negotiations, but I'm defeated by dinner," he joked as another piece fell apart before reaching his mouth. "It takes practice," Elena assured him, demonstrating the proper technique again. Like anything worthwhile. As they shared the meal and conversation, Alexander realized how comfortable he felt with Elena. There was none of the performance that had characterized his previous relationships. No need to impress with expensive gifts or exclusive access. No calculated moves or hidden agendas. Just two people enjoying each other's company, sharing food and ideas and laughter. Over coffee, Elena brought up a subject she had clearly been considering throughout the evening. "Alexander, with school starting next month, I've been thinking about our friendship." Something in her tone made him pay close attention. "What about it?" "I'm going to be very busy with classes while continuing to work weekends at the cafe. And you'll be busy with your company's new direction. I think—" She hesitated, then continued firmly. "I think we should acknowledge that whatever this is between us, it's evolving into something more than friendship." Alexander felt his heart rate increase. "I'd like that," he said carefully. "But you were the one who set the boundaries." "I know," Elena acknowledged, "and I had good reasons. Our worlds are still very different, but I've seen how genuine you are about changing your company's direction, about making a positive impact. You're not the same man I met crying in the park." "No," Alexander agreed. "I'm not. And you've been a big part of that change." Elena reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. "I'm still cautious. I still think we need to take this slowly. But I'm open to seeing where it might lead." Alexander turned his hand to grasp hers gently. "That's all I'm asking for. A chance." The following weeks brought significant changes for both of them. Elena began her full-time studies while continuing to consult on the community garden project, which broke ground with an official ceremony covered by local news outlets. Alexander restructured several departments at Blackwood Industries to align with the company's new focus on sustainable development, facing resistance from some board members, but finding unexpected allies in others. They saw each other when their schedules permitted, sometimes just for coffee, occasionally for dinner, once for a concert in the park. Elena maintained her independence, refusing Alexander's offers to help with her tuition or living expenses, but gradually allowing him greater access to her life. He met her sister and young nephews, was introduced to her study group, and became a regular at community garden volunteer days. In turn, Alexander began bringing Elena into his world. Not the superficial realm of galas and society events, but the genuine work of rebuilding his company's mission. He valued her perspective on projects, her ability to see opportunities others missed, and her unwavering ethical compass when decisions became complicated. 2 months into her program, Elena invited Alexander to attend a guest lecture at her school, given by a renowned landscape architect whose work he had been studying. Proud to support her educational journey, Alexander rearranged his schedule to attend, planning to meet her outside the lecture hall. As he approached the building, a familiar voice called his name. Turning, he saw Victoria approaching, immaculately dressed as always. "Alexander, darling." What a coincidence. "Victoria," he acknowledged with minimal warmth. What are you doing here? The Reynolds Foundation Board meeting, she explained, naming a prestigious arts organization. We're discussing funding for the new sculpture garden. But the better question is, what are you doing at a landscape architecture school? Her perfectly shaped eyebrow arched with curiosity. Before Alexander could respond, Elena emerged from the building, a stack of books in her arms. Seeing Alexander, she smiled brightly, then hesitated when she noticed Victoria. Elena, Alexander called, motioning her over. There's someone I'd like you to meet. Elena approached cautiously, her expression guarded. Victoria Winters, this is Elena Reyes. Elena is a landscape architecture student and a consultant on our Urban Green Space Initiative. Victoria assessed Elena with a swift, practiced glance that took in her simple clothing, practical shoes, and lack of expensive accessories. How lovely, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Alexander has always been so charitable. The implication was clear, and Alexander felt a surge of anger. Elena is one of the most talented designers I've ever met, he said firmly. Her work is transforming communities across the city. How fascinating, Victoria replied, her tone suggesting it was anything but. Well, I mustn't be late for my meeting. Alexander, do call me sometime. We should catch up properly. With a final dismissive glance at Elena, she sauntered away. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Elena adjusted her books, her face carefully neutral. That was Victoria, Alexander said unnecessarily. My ex. I gathered, Elena replied. She is exactly as I would have imagined. I'm sorry about what she implied, Alexander began, but Elena shook her head. Don't apologize for her. It's not the first time someone has assumed I couldn't possibly be with you, except as a charity case or a temporary diversion. The hurt in her voice was evident, despite her attempt to hide it. Alexander wanted to reassure her, to explain that Victoria's opinion meant nothing, but the arrival of other students forced them to move inside for the lecture. Throughout the presentation, Alexander was acutely aware of Elena beside him, her attention focused on the speaker while his mind churned with unspoken words. When the lecture ended, they walked silently toward the subway station, where Elena would catch her train home. I should have said something more to Victoria, Alexander finally said. I shouldn't have let her talk to you that way. Elena stopped walking and faced him directly. It's not about what you said or didn't say to her. It's about what her existence represents. What do you mean? She's your world, Alexander. The galas, the designer clothes, the foundation boards. That's the life you built. The circles you move in. Elena's voice was gentle but firm. I'm a waitress taking night classes and designing community gardens. No matter how much we might care about each other, those realities don't disappear. They're just external trappings, Alexander insisted. They don't define who we are. Don't they? Elena challenged. If we were to build a life together, whose world would we live in? Would you give up your penthouse to live in my walk-up apartment? Would I be expected to transform myself into someone who fits into your social circles? Alexander hadn't considered these practical questions, too caught up in his growing feelings for Elena to think about the logistics of their different lives. We could find a middle ground, he suggested. Create our own world. Elena's expression softened. Maybe, but tonight was a reminder of how wide the gap is. She glanced at her watch. I need to catch my train. I have an early class tomorrow. Let me call my driver, Alexander offered. He can take you home. No, Elena said firmly. I need some space to think. Please understand. Reluctantly, Alexander nodded. Call me tomorrow. I will, she promised, though something in her tone left him uncertain. Elena didn't call the next day, or the day after. Alexander respected her request for space, though it tested his patience. He threw himself into work, finalizing plans for 3 more community gardens and a larger urban farm project on reclaimed industrial land. On the 3rd evening, as he was reviewing blueprints in his home office, his phone finally buzzed with a text from Elena. Can we meet? The community garden in an hour? Alexander arrived at the garden to find it deserted except for Elena, who sat on a bench beneath the apple tree, its branches now bare with the approach of winter. She looked up as he approached, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "Thank you for coming," she said as he sat beside her, leaving careful space between them. "Of course," Alexander replied, resisting the urge to reach for her hand. "I've missed you." Elena took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about us, about whether we're being realistic or just getting caught up in a romantic notion." Alexander felt his chest tighten. "And what conclusion did you reach?" "That we have two choices," Elena said, her voice steady. "We can acknowledge the obstacles and walk away now, before we're in too deep. Or we can commit to doing the hard work of building a bridge between our worlds, knowing it won't be easy." "Those aren't equal choices to me," Alexander said quietly. "Walking away isn't an option I want to consider." Elena turned to face him fully. "Then you need to understand what I'm signing up for. I won't be a novelty in your life, someone you show off as proof of your newfound social consciousness. I won't change who I am to fit into your world. I would never ask you to," Alexander insisted. "And I won't let you upend your entire existence for me," Elena continued. "You've built something meaningful with your company, especially with these new initiatives. That matters." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if we do this, we need to be partners in creating something new. Not your life or my life, but our life." Elena's eyes held his steadily. "And we need to be patient with each other when it gets complicated, when our different backgrounds and experiences clash." Alexander felt hope rising within him. "You're willing to try." "I am," Elena confirmed. "Because despite all the reasons this shouldn't work, I can't ignore how I feel when I'm with you. How every part of my life seems brighter, more purposeful." Alexander closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "Elena Reyes, from the moment you offered me a handkerchief in the rain, you've been showing me what really matters. Not success as the world defines it, but connection, purpose, making a difference in people's lives." "And you've helped me believe in my dreams," Elena replied, her voice soft with emotion. "Shown me that my vision has value." Their first kiss was gentle, a promise rather than a demand. When they parted, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "What happens now?" he asked. Elena smiled. "Now we build something beautiful together, one day at a time." 6 months later, the first Blackwood-sponsored community garden was ready for its grand opening. The once vacant lot had been transformed into a vibrant green space exactly as Elena had envisioned it. Vegetable plots ready for planting, a butterfly garden buzzing with early pollinators, natural play areas for children, and a small amphitheater for community events. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew hundreds of local residents, city officials, and media representatives. Alexander stood proudly at Elena's side as she addressed the crowd, explaining the features of the garden and acknowledging the community members who had contributed to its creation. "This garden belongs to all of you," Elena concluded. "May it grow and flourish for generations to come." As the official ceremony ended and people began exploring the new space, Ms. Josephine approached them, her sharp eyes taking in Alexander's hand resting lightly at Elena's waist. "So the money man and our Elena found more than a garden to grow together," she observed with a knowing smile. "I had my suspicions when he kept showing up at community meetings." Elena blushed slightly. Ms. Josephine, always seeing everything. "Old eyes still work," the elderly woman replied, "and what they see today is good." "You kept your word," she added, addressing Alexander directly. "This garden is everything you promised and more." "Elena's vision, not mine," Alexander demurred. "I just provided resources." Ms. Josephine shook her head. "Don't sell yourself short, money man. Providing resources is important, but so is showing up, listening, learning." She patted his arm. "You've done all three." As she moved away to inspect the vegetable plots, Elena squeezed Alexander's hand. High praise from the neighborhood watchdog. "I'll treasure it," he said sincerely. They walked through the garden together, stopping to chat with residents and answer questions. Near the butterfly garden, they found Dmitri from the original community garden where they'd first connected over Elena's designs. "You have created something special here," the old gardener told Elena, his face beaming with pride. "A piece of paradise in the concrete." I had good teachers, Elena replied, looking from Dmitri to Alexander, and strong support. As evening approached and the crowd began to thin, Alexander and Elena found themselves alone near the small fountain that marked the garden's center. Water bubbled peacefully over natural stones, catching the golden light of sunset. "I have something for you," Alexander said, reaching into his pocket. "A garden-warming gift." He handed Elena a small box tied with simple twine. Inside, she found a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a sunflower. "It reminded me of your handkerchief," Alexander explained. "The one you gave me when we first met." Elena touched the pendant gently. "It's beautiful." "Turn it over," he urged. On the back was engraved a single phrase: "What begins in kindness ends in forever." "Alexander," Elena breathed, emotion making her voice unsteady. "I'm not proposing," he clarified quickly. "Not yet. We agreed to take things slowly, and I respect that. But I wanted you to know that I see a future with you, Elena. A long one." Elena unclasped the chain and held it out to him, turning so he could fasten it around her neck. As his fingers brushed her skin, she leaned back against him slightly. "I see that future too," she said softly. They stood together as the setting sun cast long shadows across the garden they had created, not just the physical space with its plants and paths, but the shared vision they had built between them, a bridge across different worlds, proving that what matters most isn't where you come from or what you own, but who you choose to become and who you choose to love. In the distance, children laughed as they explored the natural playground. Elderly residents rested on benches, watching the day fade into evening. Community members finished planting the first seedlings in the vegetable plots, their hands dark with the same soil that had once lain abandoned and neglected. "Look at what we've started," Elena murmured, taking in the scene. Alexander wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "This is just the beginning," he promised. "There are so many more gardens to grow." From that day in the park when a billionaire's tears were met with a simple act of kindness, to this moment of shared purpose and quiet joy, their journey had transformed not just each other, but rippled outward to touch countless lives. A handkerchief offered without expectation had grown into something neither could have imagined, proof that the most powerful changes often begin with the smallest gestures of compassion. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.